In 2009 in Tucson, with under $312 to my name, I turned a rusted out step van behind a closed tire shop into a home with light, a cool interior, drinking water, and a place to cook. For almost 2 years, the people walking past that lot every morning had no idea anyone lived inside it, much less that I was sleeping better than I had in the apartment I lost. The first night I slept in there, I lay on a salvaged camping pad, listening to the metal skin tick as it cooled, and for the first time in months, I was not afraid of the dark or the cold or the phone ringing. I want to be honest with you about something before I go any further. What I built was not luck, and it was not improvisation. It was a system, refined piece by piece, learned from other people living the same way, tested by mistakes that nearly killed me, and stitched together out of parts that the rest of the world had already thrown in a dumpster. The sophistication of it is going to surprise you, because it surprised me, and I am the one who put it together. The single part that actually keeps the whole place running cost me $28 at a swap meet on Asia Way, and I am going to show you exactly what it is. But I am not going to show you yet, because if I tell you that part before I tell you about the winner, I almost suffocated myself trying to stay warm. You will not understand why it matters. And the same engineering that made a dead box truck livable for nothing is the engineering that would keep your own house running if the grid went down next week, or if Rent in your city did what Rent in mine did and pushed you out the door. So stay with me. I lost the apartment in the spring of 2009. I had been a finished carpenter for 14 years. And when the construction work dried up, I watched my savings disappear in about 5 months. The waiting list for subsidized housing in Pima County was a little over 3 years long at the time. And I did the math on a napkin in a public library and realized that 3 years on a sidewalk would kill me long before a unit opened up. So I stopped waiting. That is the part nobody tells you about people in my situation. A lot of us stop waiting, and what we build in the meantime is more interesting than anyone in a comfortable house wants to believe. The step van had been parked behind that tire shop for at least 4 years when I found it. The owner of the shop had gone out of business. The lot was in some kind of probate, and the van itself had 2 flat tires, a dead battery, and a roof that was technically intact if you did not look too closely. I tracked down the previous owner through a stack of paperwork in the glove box and bought it from him for $140 cash with a handwritten bill of sale that I still have in a folder. That left me with $172 to turn it into a home. Now here's the part that most people get wrong when they imagine doing this. They think the first thing you spend money on is power. It is not. The first thing you spend money on is the thermal envelope, because in Tucson, the sun will cook you to death inside a metal box long before a lack of electricity becomes the problem. I learned that the hard way during my second week when the interior of that van hit 138 degrees on a Tuesday afternoon, and I came back from the day labor pickup to find my 1 jug of drinking water too hot to swallow. So I went to work on the walls. I salvaged rigid foam insulation from a construction site that was throwing out half sheets at the end of each day, the kind that has an R value of about 6.5 per inch. I layered 2 inches of it against every interior wall, the ceiling, and the floor, and I sealed every seam with foil tape I bought for $4 at a hardware store on Speedway. Total cost of insulating the entire van, because almost all of the foam was free, $19 and change. After that, the interior on a 105-degree day held at about 84. That is a 50-degree difference, and it cost me less than a tank of gas. But insulation alone was not enough, and this is where the engineering gets interesting. I cut 2 vents into the van, one low on the shaded north side and one high on the south side near the roof, and I covered them with screen and a hinged flap I could close from inside. That created what physicists call a stack effect. Hot air rises out the top vent, cool air gets pulled in the bottom, and the whole interior breathes on its own without a single watt of electricity. On the worst days of August, I added one more trick I learned from a man named Earl who was living in a converted utility shed about a mile from me. He hung a damp burlap sheet across the inside of the lower vent. As the incoming air passed through the wet burlap, it dropped another 8 to 12 degrees through pure evaporation. The desert is dry enough that this works almost like magic. Total cost of the cooling system, including the burlap I cut from a feed sack behind a livestock store, about $6. That solved the heat, but the cold almost killed me, and I need to tell you about that because it is the mistake that taught me everything else. The first winter, I tried to heat the inside of the van the way a desperate man tries to heat anything, which is by burning something in a closed space. I will not tell you exactly what I burned or how, because I do not want anyone watching this to copy what I did. What I will tell you is that I woke up at 3 in the morning with a headache that felt like an ice pick through my temple, and I had just enough sense left to kick the back door open and crawl out onto the gravel. I lay there breathing cold air for 20 minutes before I could stand up. If I had been any more tired or any more drunk on the cheap wine I was using to sleep back then, I would not be talking to you right now. That mistake teaches you fast, and it teaches you once. After that, I never again tried to heat the inside of that van with combustion. Instead, I went the other direction. I added another inch of foam to the walls. I sealed every air leak I could find with weather stripping from a thrift store, and I built what is essentially a sleeping pocket inside the larger space, a smaller insulated box just big enough for me, and a salvaged sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees. My body heat alone, trapped inside that smaller envelope, kept me at about 62 degrees on the coldest Tucson nights, which dip into the high 20s a few times a year. That cost me nothing but salvage material and one weekend of work. No flame, no fuel, no carbon monoxide, no chance of waking up dead. Now let me tell you about the power, because this is the part everyone asks about. I spent $46 on a used 100-watt solar panel that a guy at a yard sale on Grant Road was selling out of his garage. It had a small crack in one corner, but still produced about 82 watts in full sun, which I confirmed with a borrowed meter before I handed over the cash. I paired it with a secondhand deep cycle marine battery I bought for $35 from a boat repair shop that was about to send it to recycling. It only held about 60% of its rated capacity, which still gave me roughly 60 amp hours at 12 volts. That is enough, if you are careful, to run a small LED light strip, charge a phone, run a USB fan on hot nights, and keep a tiny 12-volt water pump alive. I wired it through a $10 charge controller from an auto parts store, and the whole electrical system, panel and battery and controller and wire and fuses included came in at just under $94. That setup ran my entire home for 19 months without a single failure. 19 months. Think about what your electric bill has been over the last 19 months, and then think about $94 one time total. The water was the last piece and the cheapest. Tucson gets about 12 inches of rain a year, which sounds like nothing until you do the math. The roof of that step van was about 70 square feet. 1 inch of rain on 70 square feet is roughly 43 gallons of water. 12 inches a year is over 500 gallons, falling for free onto a surface I already owned. I ran a length of salvaged gutter along one edge of the roof, angled it into a 5-gallon food-grade bucket I got from a bakery for $2, and ran the overflow into 3 more buckets daisy-chained together. For drinking, I ran the water through a gravity filter I built out of a second bucket, some sand, some charcoal from a campfire, and a coffee filter at the bottom, which is a design that has been used on homesteads and in field hospitals for over 100 years. For anything I was going to drink, I also boiled it on a small alcohol stove that cost me $4. I never got sick. Not once. Now, I want to stop for a minute and talk directly to you, because I know a lot of people watching this are not living in a step van behind a tire shop. You are sitting in a house or an apartment, and you are wondering what any of this has to do with you. Stay with me, because the part that matters most to you is the one I would reach for first if you ever woke up to a dead grid, a rent hike you could not cover, or just the simple wish to own a place outright with no bank and no landlord. If the power went out in your city tomorrow and stayed out for a week, the single most valuable thing you could have is not a generator. Generators run out of fuel. They are loud. They advertise to every neighbor that you have something worth taking, and they cost more than most people can spare. What you want is exactly what kept me alive in that van. 1 small solar panel, 1 used deep cycle battery, 1 cheap charge controller, and a handful of 12-volt and USB devices. For under $200 total, you can build a system that will keep your phone charged, your lights on, a fan running, and your refrigerator cold enough to save the food inside it for at least the first crucial days of any outage. You can build it this weekend. You do not need an electrician. You need a couple of YouTube videos, a multimeter from a hardware store, and the willingness to read the instructions on the charge controller twice. And if you have a piece of land somewhere, even a small one, the same logic that turned a dead step van into a home will turn a shed or a small cabin into a fully off-grid retreat for a fraction of what anyone will quote you. Insulate first. Ventilate with physics, not electricity. Catch your own water off the roof. Power the essentials with a small panel and a used battery. Heat with envelope and body, not with flame in a sealed box. That is the whole playbook. It is not a secret. It is just inconvenient to the people who would prefer you keep paying them every month for the privilege of being warm. Now, the part I promised you at the beginning, the $28 piece that actually made everything else work, it was a small 12-volt to USB power distribution block with a built-in voltage cutoff, the kind that marine electricians use on small sailboats to protect the battery from getting drained below the point where it can recover. I bought it at a swap meet on Ahaway from a man who had pulled it out of a boat he was scrapping. Before I had that little box, I killed 2 batteries in 3 months by accidentally drawing them below 11 volts overnight. Each dead battery set me back another $30 or $40 I did not have. After I installed that cutoff, I never killed another battery, not one. For 19 months, that $28 piece of marine hardware silently protected the single most expensive component of my entire home from the single mistake that would have destroyed it. That is the secret. Not the panel, not the insulation, not the rainwater, the cutoff. The piece nobody tells you about because nobody who has not lived through killing 2 batteries in a row understands why it matters. A retired sailor named Hank, who lived in a converted cargo trailer 2 blocks from my van, told me about it the morning after my second battery died. He drew me a diagram on the back of a gas station receipt. I still have that receipt. And now you have the same knowledge because he gave it to me and I am giving it to you. I lived in that step van for 22 months. I left it when I got a job back in finished carpentry and could afford a small apartment again. And I sold the van to another man in a similar situation for the same $140 I had paid for it. With all the systems still in place, as far as I know, he lived in it for at least another year after that. What I want you to take from this is not pity, because I do not want it and I do not need it. What I want you to take is the quiet certainty that a working home with light and water and a cool interior and a place to cook and a safe place to sleep does not have to cost what the market tells you it costs. The knowledge to build one for almost nothing exists. It has existed for 100 years. It gets handed from one person to the next in parking lots and behind tire shops and over coffee at day labor pickups, and now it has been handed to you. If you are the kind of person who believes the most important knowledge is the kind nobody teaches in a classroom, you already understand why this matters, especially with where rents and power bills are heading in this country. Of everything I built in that van, which system would you set up first if you had a weekend and $100? The insulation, the cooling, the power, the water? Tell me in the comments and be specific about why, because I read them and I learned from you the same way I learned from Hank and Earl. If you want to keep going down this road with me, the next video is going to be about the cooling system in detail, including the exact geometry of those 2 vents and the trick with the burlap, because I get more questions about that than anything else. And there is one more piece to it I have not told you yet. Stick around. There is more where this came from, and none of it costs what they want you to believe it costs.